You, my friends, are following in the very footsteps of history. Something beyond the power of words to describe. Human beings simply aren't built to function at the cruising altitude of a 747. Our bodies will be literally dying. Everest is another beast altogether.
It hurts. It's dangerous. Why? I have kids. They see a regular guy can follow impossible dreams. Maybe they'll do the same.
I'm on the top of Everest, Alan. We made it.
This is the Next Reel's Film Board, everybody. Each month, the gang of thugs gather to take on one film currently in theaters and spoil that film rotten this month. We're heading to Nepal to tackle the Great Mountain with Everest from director Balthasar Kormákur. I'm Pete Wright, and joining us around the table we have Steve Sarmento.
Hey, good night, everybody. I'm feeling a little lightheaded because I did this one without oxygen.
And Andy Nelson.
Hello, hello.
And back from his own sojourn up and down the mountain, Justin Jaeger.
Hi, who wants a snow cone?
Before we get into the film, you should learn more about us at thenextreel.com/filmboard. Subscribe to the show for free on iTunes or follow us on Twitter and Facebook at The Next Reel. Be sure to join us at Instagram.com/thenextreel and play the Instagram hashtag Pony Prize, hashtag Guess the Movie Challenge. Contests start each Friday. Everest. My goodness, I have been cold all day since we saw this movie. And the rat holes, when you start looking into the movie and the background behind the movie, this, of course, as I said, Balthasar Kormákur, directed it, writers William Nicholson and Simon Beaufoy, based on the book by John Krakauer, Into Thin Air.
Oh, that's totally not true.
What?
That's what I found out. It's not based on that book at all.
It's not?
It's totally not. That was why it changed everything that I thought. Well, not everything, but a lot of what I thought about the movie. Kormákur actually came out and said, doesn't have anything to do with that. Actually, it has more to do with a book that Beck Weathers wrote. But we could talk about that more.
Oh,
really?
Oh, yeah, that totally changes things, because John Krakauer is a character in the movie.
Right.
And we were talking as we walked out about how interesting it is that John Krakauer wasn't deified more in this film, and now I know why.
Yep.
Okay, so that is new news, and I'm glad we have that on the table. Apart from that, before we get into more of the details, how did the film hit you, Andy?
I never read the book, and I didn't see wasn't it an IMAX documentary that came out shortly after? I never saw that either. So, except I knew everything that happened. I mean, I didn't know everything that happened, but I knew about the event that happened. This was really my first foray into the details of kind of the situation. And I found it really fascinating. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I never quite got emotionally involved. I never was really wrapped up in it as much as I was hoping to be. Although it still hit me as all of the tragedy starts happening. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was an interesting look into the situation, but I didn't walk out loving it.
All right, Steve.
It left me cold.
But see, now I have to ask, in a good way?
No, it was something that I experienced, and it was a film that reenacted events that occurred, but other than that, it just really didn't do much for me. I mean, I will say, seeing it in IMAX, yes, it's a spectacle, but other than that, it just didn't do much for me.
Oh, interesting. All right, JJ.
Well, I'm going to start by saying that I liked this movie. I think it is something to see, but beyond that, I think I'm saying that right up front because I think pretty much everything else I'm going to say over the course of the time that we're together is going to sound really negative.
What a glowing review.
Yeah, well, and to kind of go back to what we were talking about with the whole Krakauer thing. So I was a huge fan of the book. Actually, it was a big page turner for me, and it's the only Krakauer I've read in particular. But I want to read the comment from Kormákur because I think it'll kind of lead to some of the stuff that I'll talk about the more as we get into deeper. He says, to be honest, I wasn't that interested in telling a story about a writer on a mountain. I've seen lots of movies about writers. And he says that Krakauer's book is a first-person account, and there are a lot of things that he assumes or thought that happened that didn't really happen. This is the story of a group of people who are going up this mountain, and I wanted to be true to that. And that's kind of, I'm going to talk a lot about that today, because I think the idea about truth and the idea about movies and the idea about what makes them good is kind of where I'm going to get into my contrast here.
I feel like I need to ask the question. Balthasar Kormákur says he doesn't want to take Krakauer's opinion. Who was there?
Right.
Nobody has any problem with that?
Well, there's, you've got a lot of people on that mountain, a lot of people that were, and he wasn't there because I read the book as well. And so, again, I was puzzled because I recalled he had a specific point of view about certain things that happened. And this film doesn't stick to any one. I don't know that it has a point of view, and that's my issue with. Well,
that is certainly an issue, I think, with the film.
So I think to say the filmmaker to say I'm not going to focus on this one account because there are a lot of people that were there that have their versions of events. So how does he put that all together? And I think as JJ saying, we can start to discuss how well that works is in terms of a narrative for a film.
All right. Well, I think I'm with most of you. Not to belabor the point, I found myself really distracted by some things that I know were supposed to be tragic and sad that ended up feeling really comical. And that sounds so grim, but watching really the first two deaths, I actually grabbed my mouth because I was laughing. Like, I thought there's got to have been a way to actually portray these with the gravitas that they probably deserved. And from then on, I couldn't connect. I couldn't connect with any of these people. There were too many people in too many damn suits that I couldn't tell who was there. I didn't know where they were until they were like totally isolated. Obviously, Rob Hall on the side of the mountain, I followed him. But otherwise, it was a wash in characters, and they really nailed the traffic jam aspect of Everest that I think was started by this whole, by commercializing tours to the summit. But wow, did I have trouble getting into this film. This is definitely not, it is not aged with me even over the last 4 hours since I saw it.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience for me because, as I told you earlier, Pete, I took my almost 9-year-old daughter, and she really connected with the characters. And I think that I maybe had more of a connection to the events going on than you did, because those events that you found so comical, she was in racking sobs, like on my chest, in just devastated that these people that she had grown to know were dying. And it really affected her in a way that I was quite shocked by, and touched by the fact that, just getting to know these people over the course of an hour, all of a sudden, as they start having these situations hit them, it really hit her hard. And I think that there is something about the death scenes that I think actually worked for me, even though they didn't work for you. Aside from how my daughter reacted to them, I found them almost more shocking, the fact that it was just such a small thing that happened that ended their lives. The first guy, he unclips himself and he's trying to reclip, but he's so out of oxygen and can't focus that he just steps right off the edge of the mountain. And then the second guy, he's going through that whatever thing where they are delusional and thinks they're too hot and is trying to take his clothes off and slips right off the mountain. I mean, it was fascinating to me that it's just such simple little things like that can suddenly just end somebody's life up there. And I found that really quite interesting, actually.
I do think it's interesting, but I think that I still can't help the response. Like my instant response was not, wow, look how quickly that happened. It was, oh my God, I got to stop laughing. Like, I really regret this experience that I'm having because I know this is serious, but the way it happened so quickly and the way it was framed with Hall, kind of really trying to soberly get himself down the mountain and his buddy trying to clip himself, and it just the way the whole incident was framed, it was as if we were to just see it as incidental. And I maybe that was the intention, that this, look at how incidental life becomes when it's on the side of this mountain. I that did not connect with me. Like there was not any of that sort of level of gravitas that I feel like it deserved. What I do think they did well, speaking of death, not to kind of go down this particular road too early, but I think there were a number of times where you'd get this sort of passing as they're climbing the mountain, and they would just show you sort of in the foreground there would be a body frozen in the foreground, and I didn't quite get that at first, but as I was looking up looking for actual images from the film, I ended up at a series of articles, most of them really cataloging the graveyard at 26,000 feet, and showing, because so often they can't get the bodies down off of Everest, even though it is the policy of the Nepalese government to actually reclaim bodies that are lost there. Most of them they can't get to. So these bodies are there for decades, just sitting there, and they don't get covered with snow because the snow is blowing too fast. And so you end up walking this. In fact, Scott Fisher, who is played by Jake Gyllenhaal, his body is still there in the same position in which he died, except for now he's got his suit on, his boots and his suit, but it's just a skeleton frozen to the top of his skull is just a skeleton frozen to the top of his suit. That's still there. Like, there are photos of that on Flickr.
That's horrifying.
It is horrifying. The number of people I think, and I haven't seen this attributed well, but there is a climber in the red suit that has been attributed to be Rob Hall. Still there, frozen, and he's not frozen on the side of the cliff face like he is in the film. He's frozen kind of a different position, like he's fallen over backward. But people say they think that's him.
Wow.
These are. It's just horrifying. So I think that aspect of sort of the sober kind of reality of it, and then to see what the traffic jam really looks like when you get these shots from a distance of the not 10, not 20 people climbing Everest at once, but 200 all cabled into the same rope trying to climb the faces that we saw depicted in this film. It gives you a sense of what I think they were trying to showcase as this inciting incident of the tourism industry around Everest. And I thought in that respect, it did a good job. I just couldn't connect with the people.
Well, yeah, and so I asked the question, or I wanted to ask the question about, getting in touch with the people. The fact that it became this ensemble, and that there, I don't know, I don't want to discount anyone's feelings going in, and if they did get in touch with the people, but I wasn't able to connect with any of them, and that's what I mentioned before that I'm a huge fan of the book. There was time in the book to really get into everyone's story, and like one maybe moment where we would have had the chance to connect with the individuals for me was when Krakauer is going around and asking people why they want to climb, and no one gave a good answer. No one. I mean, we did find out about the stories behind them, but no one. Everyone's emotional. It felt like everyone's emotionally compelling reason was because it was there, and that seemed very empty to me. And it only turned their actual death scenes that were, because they were so immediate and mildly comical in a way. If you were detached in that moment, it seemed only consistent with the fact that they didn't have a reason to be there and they were gone. And the statement that it's making, if it's making a statement, which I'm not fully sure that it is right now, it just didn't hit with me. And I would say because of the filmmaking, it didn't, both in story and in each of those moments. So, there are a couple moments that were emotional for me. If we want to talk about death scenes, when the long, slow pullback from Beck Weathers and Yasko, that went on forever, and that was one that hit me. That was the time that I was connected to it. But that was a filmmaking moment where they made it heavy for me. I didn't feel that way with any of the others. And I didn't get connected
when was
that way.
When was that scene again, JJ? The pullback from Beck, was it when Beck was left in the snow?
Yep. In the middle of
first
the
time?
storm, well, I feel like he was left like 3 or 4 times, but it was the last time that he was left in the storm.
When you get his POV and the kind of he can't see very well at that point, right?
His POV first, and then they reverse and they show from him and they do a slow pull, and it goes on for a long time.
Too.
Yeah, I think I would say I would give it like 15 to 20 seconds, and it was heavy for me. That was the heavy part for me. The others I couldn't get into.
It was when that guy came up and kind of took the last of what they thought were the alive people from that area and carried them back to camp.
That was the horrifying part, is the fact that he was left for dead.
Right.
And that was tough to watch. And made tougher when he came back. Like the next day, he was able to kind of muster himself up and climb down into the camp. That was pretty intense.
And now that you hear that the story for the film was actually based on his account, I mean, that I guess for me that makes a whole lot more sense, because he didn't start out as a central character, but it really became his story. I felt like at some point, and I don't think they deified Beck by any means, but yeah, the subtle turn that he makes, or whatever, it really starts to give a sort of POV for what he did. And of course, he was left for dead and did get off the mountain. He wasn't one that went down early, and he wasn't one that stayed too late. So I don't know. It seems to make sense that is the tale that we're creating the source material from.
It certainly made sense when you hear that, having the Texan housewives come to the rescue.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense now, because that was one of the things we were talking about as I left the theater was, it comes off as like his ego, Beck Weather's ego depicted early was they're on the bus together, and just the scripting in that sequence was really hard for me to like stay in touch with. I thought he was his character was, it wasn't just that he was abrasive. I mean, I get abrasive and I can connect with abrasive. This was that he was just sort of nonsensically abrasive. Like it's almost as if he was it was a Turing test and he was a robot just trying to build responses that are human like but not quite human. And so I had a real problem, and I really like Josh Brolin. Like, I think he's fantastic, and I'm a big fan of his work. But I had such a hard time early on getting in touch with that character and feeling like I was along for the ride that I found it really hard to figure out how to care about him later. This still, knowing that it was based on his account, still doesn't give me any sense or affect any sense of who our so to speak, hero was. Who am I really supposed to follow?
Well, I think that, again, speaks to the sense that it feels very informative. Like when I walked out of it, I was like, wow, that was really interesting to learn kind of more of the details about what had actually happened up there. But it doesn't let you connect to anybody.
Well, there's no, as I walked out of there, and having read Krakauer's book, there was a different perspective on some events. And what I think troubles me the most, or makes it hard to connect, is there's things that went wrong. And the film takes no stance to point fingers or place blame or fault anyone. That it's just, why weren't the oxygen tanks there? Why didn't the ropes get put up? And it's just like, these things didn't happen. So we have nobody to sympathize with because there's no one to blame. There's nobody to say, this is, these... I think the closest thing we get is when Jake Gyllenhaal, talks about his team. Hey, he's only taking up people that can get up there on his own, whereas Rob's got, like Beck Weathers, who's paying him $65,000 to get him up there, whether he's really capable or able to do it or not, or as we see with Doug. And so that's the only sort of stance the film seems to take is, yeah, there were some people on the mountain that shouldn't have maybe been there, and the South Africans, but it doesn't really set them up as it's because they were there that these bad things happen and we should fault them. And I felt like the filmmakers were maybe being a little bit, hesitant to place blame on those that have passed, that didn't make it down off the mountain out of respect for their families. But as a result, we just have, like I said, it's like watching a recreation. It's just very factual. And to me, there's a sequence of events that happen, but it's not really even telling me Beck's story at all, because he comes off as just this really not likable guy at the beginning. There's a scene where he's talking about, I thought I was going to acclimatize better, and I'm thinking, you're not ready to be on this mountain. You shouldn't be there. He does end up getting rescued, but he put himself in a position that he probably shouldn't have been in, so I don't sympathize with him. And as I recall in Krakauer's book, I think, and it's been probably over a decade since I've read that Krakauer blamed like people like Beck Weathers for why things went wrong, because the guides had to take care of these people that weren't ready to be there, and that was completely absent from the film. And I thought this director is just taking no stance one way or the other of anything about other than I'm going to show you a timeline of what happened without any perspective or point of view or opinion about anything.
Right, and that's where we get into my problem with the allegiance to the truth that Kormákur is talking about with the way that he makes this movie. He didn't want a hero. He didn't want a villain. He just wanted to be true and say that, hey, these are mistakes that happened and there was a storm there. And I understand, I guess, the choice that he's making there, but it lacks courage. The thing about Krakauer's book, whether or not you agree with the way that Krakauer portrays them, he creates protagonists and antagonists. So when we're talking about a good story here, this movie lacks it in some respects because it is so careful not to point the finger anywhere. Where Krakauer, and I loved the book. I mean, full confession there. I loved the book. I finished it in a week, and I'm a slow reader. He knows enough to go through and give us his opinion of a hero. And yes, it's his opinion, but he has the courage to put it forth. And I think that's a more courageous choice than what we're seeing here in this movie, which is everybody made mistakes. It was a bad storm. There wasn't something we could do. Here's what happened. Go ahead. They should make a documentary then. We need a story. We need a protagonist. We need to know these things if we're going to watch a film in this context. Otherwise, it falls flat. And the story really fell flat for me in that respect. And I went in thinking it was an adaptation of the Krakauer book, and I just thought it was a below average version of it. Now looking at it, it seems like they were choices that the filmmakers made to do it this way, and I think that was a mistake.
Who was the protagonist or antagonist in the book? I mean, if he really did take that perspective, I mean, who would you say he was, putting in those positions?
I think he was. So I'm gonna cop out a little bit and say that I think that what Krakauer believed is that the protagonist were the people that had the sense to turn around when it was the right decision to turn around, and those people weren't profiled in this film at all. We saw them. The three of them had a conversation with Beck on the way down. Right, the three of them. And you could argue that Krakauer is kind of saying that about himself, even though he summited first and he came down and he didn't turn around to go get the people. Yeah, I feel like Krakauer had a lot of identified antagonists and said the survival instinct that set up everyone else to get away from the mountain before the real bad stuff happened, or following the rules that they set for themselves, that was the protagonist. So I don't think he's saying that those people were heroic, just that they listened to their instinct. And anyone who didn't was wrong.
Was the documentary following pretty much that same path too?
Well, and I haven't seen that. Unfortunately, I can't speak to that.
I saw the documentary when it was out on the IMAX theater. When was that? Like 98? And I think it's the case of they were there shooting, back in, the 90s when IMAX films were like 45-minute nature spectacles. I think there was a crew that was there shooting a film about Everest when these things happened. So right. There were, it didn't take a point of view on that at all. And I haven't seen it since I saw it in the theaters. But it was, I think similar to this, and here's, about Everest, and these things happened, these climbers were there, but I don't remember it really being anything other than, wow, something really tragic happened up on the mountain in the spring of 96.
How much of this is, I get the lack of sort of commitment that we're talking about to actually take a stand. How much of this is on, the director's vision versus the script, in your opinion? The script is by William Nicholson and Simon Beaufoy, and both of them have some fantastic credits to their name. In the case of Nicholson, he's behind Unbroken, Les Mis, Gladiator, Nell. He's got 20 credits in total. And Beaufoy's recent outings, he had Hunger Games: Catching Fire, which we were fans of. He also did, interestingly, 127 Hours.
Wow.
Speaking of Man Against Nature, and of course Slumdog Millionaire in 2008. So both of these guys have some, I think some arguably great projects under their belts. And so, how does this stack up? Does it sounds like it doesn't quite convey the story.
Well, if you look at Simon Beaufoy wrote, you said, 127
hours, yeah.
Right. And so, again, you're looking at a recreation of a tragic event. But if you look at how emotional that film was when you don't have a lot going on other than, someone stuck, and how that experience compares to this, unless I haven't read, the scripts to look at that, but I know that he showed himself capable of taking a factual event to be able to recreate that and structure it in a way that, again, you don't necessarily have, traditional protagonist, antagonist, was able to create some emotional investment in that story that we completely lack here. So I think part of it is the script. I think there's some other things going on in terms of directing that, aside from the story, are also issues I have with the film. But focusing on the story, I think, a writer has proven capable of doing that, but I don't see it here.
Well, and that may be an unfair comparison because that 127 hours in particular was co-written by Danny Boyle, the director, and that's, obviously we have a certain affinity for Danny Boyle.
Well, interesting. William Nicholson wrote Unbroken, and which was the Runner documentary that Angelina Jolie directed last year, and he also wrote Mandela: Long Walk to Freedom from a couple years before that. And they're both biopics just like this, and I heard they both fell flat quite a bit. I didn't see either of them, so I really can't speak to that, but I do think it's interesting that in those cases they were kind of flat films.
Well, there's that, and then it goes to source material too, right? So we talk about Beck Weathers' book. It's coincidentally called Left for Dead. The other thing that they say, it also comes from, is that it incorporates lines directly from the audio tapes from May 10th of that year. And so you get into sort of like the screenwriter's idea of the source material. They're taking exact things. And again, I don't mean to hark on that point, but it lacks commitment to tell a story. And it feels more like reporting what happened. So it's interesting that, we have those experiences of possibly other screenplays that fell flat, and then you take source material that's, by nature exact as opposed to dramatic, and that's probably all part and parcel to what the feeling is there.
I've been thinking about this, JJ, because, we've got Steve Jobs coming out, the Aaron Sorkin, Danny Boyle film coming out in just a little bit, and that seems like a perfect counterexample. First of all, that Steve Jobs book was based on a book that wasn't great. Particularly if you follow kind of the history of Jobs and the stories and the rest of the lore, it's not a great book. But what you have in Aaron Sorkin is a guy who is not afraid to make a commitment one direction or the other, and to vilify if it tells a good story. And I think it'll be, the early reports are that this movie is fantastic. It's the movie to watch, and driven largely by the commitment and style and tone of a great screenwriter. And we just don't have that here. I think that is a counterexample. In Sorkin's case, some of the things that are in the movie are not true. Even the people who lived them, when you hear Steve Wozniak say, no, a lot of these things were not true, but it was such a damn good story that I really like this movie. Awesome. Like that's really a big deal, and I don't know. I don't get any sort of feeling like that from Everest. I walk away feeling flat. And the source material in particular in this movie, I should feel something about this. I really should. I feel empty and cold inside.
It's an interesting dilemma. And we've talked about truth in film quite a bit in the last few months of our episodes, with Deer Hunter and portraying the war in Vietnam, and Sophie's Choice and World War II, and just how people choose to portray real situations. It's tricky, and I think you're right. I think something like The Social Network was a film we talked about a long time ago, and it's a very interesting example of kind of manipulating the truth to create a better story. And wherein the line lies as far as a storyteller, making a better story for film. What's the point that they shouldn't cross? Because a lot of people see Social Network and go, man, that Mark Zuckerberg's a complete ass, and taking it for truth, and so it becomes an interesting line in the world of storytelling. And I'm always, I shouldn't say always, but it leaves me a little bit at a loss. Like, where is the line? And I don't know if they're, what to say about where that line is. And a film like this, I watch it and I say, well, I appreciate that he tried maybe telling it a more true story as far as how things actually happened, but it does end up creating less interesting film. And I guess that's the challenge of filmmakers is, are you going to just tell a straightforward story, or are you here telling a story for the audience to enjoy, even if you have to manipulate the truth a little bit?
Let's talk through some of the cast members, if you're all right with that, because there's a case to be made, I think, here, as in many films, that these guys turned in some really good performances. I think in some cases that we should probably talk about, even if the overall film did not live up to our expectations. The title role, I think our leaders of the teams, we have Jason Clarke playing Rob Hall, and we have Jake Gyllenhaal playing Scott Fisher. These are the teams that merged at Camp 1, 2, 3, wherever they were, and decided to do the ascent together. And neither of these guys made it off the mountain. What did you think of their performances?
I really didn't have a problem with any of the performances in the film. Jason Clarke, I thought, brought a nice sense of burden along, I think, that kind of trying to sort out this monster that he had created and trying to figure out how to manage this situation. I thought he did a good job portraying that.
It was still, even though I walked out not really connecting with it, it was still a better turn for him than Terminator Genesis. So I'll leave that out.
And well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think that I saw a note that said that Christian Bale was actually initially thought of to be Rob Hall,
right?
And at that point, the film was mostly about Rob Hall. And then when he bagged out to go do, what is it, Exodus,
Gods and Kings,
Gods and Monsters, or whatever, yeah,
Exodus Monsters Ball,
yeah. Then they decided to make it more ensemble. And I mean, I actually didn't have a problem with any of the performances either. I bought into it. I was actually shocked at how well Keira Knightley got the accent. I love Keira Knightley, and I just have never seen that. So, and that's a particular accent. I don't know. I was happy with the performances. Love seeing Stamper. Always love him on screen. Michael Kelly. And yeah, I thought it was a great, I was super impressed with the cast.
It was one of those things where I looked at everybody in this film and said, it's lesser than the sum of its parts. How is this happening? Because it is. I mean, it's casting, and one of the things I talked about my daughter with because I took her and her boyfriend with to see it, and we talked about, keeping track of everybody. Are each of these people individual enough, and are they casting and performance enough that you know who each of these people are, that you're not confused? Because, as they both said, there's a lot of guys with beards. So how can you distinguish between this guy with the beard, this guy with the beard, and that? And I think the film did a good job of that in the casting and the performances, that they each have a unique personality that comes across, not just generic mountain climber with beard numbered 1, 2, and 3. So I just think, in terms of shooting a film like this, knowing it's going to be for IMAX, there's some tight close-ups that just were way too intense. Again, Keira Knightley tearing up and crying, and it's just like her tears are the size of like 3-story buildings on IMAX. And it was just, I'm like, that's a little bit too close for my comfort zone when I'm seeing it on full-blown IMAX. So it just brought her and a lot of the facial close-ups like right into your lap, and I thought that's not quite working with IMAX. The mountain looks huge. I shouldn't see pores looking the size of basketballs on the screen, but.
Well, we definitely need to talk about the IMAX effect in a second because that's important. But I do want to call out John Hawkes. I think he did a fantastic job, even if I wasn't crazy about his particular death scene. I love seeing him on screen, and it was unfortunate that he was written out in the way. It's unfortunate that history wrote him out in such a way that it was depicted this way on screen. I think it was funny that we talk about the Terminator and Sam Worthington ends up showing up in this film. Like, the connections between Terminator are just too great. But I thought he actually did a great job. It was nice to see him on stage. The list of people that are, I don't think any of them are at the level of saying that this film could have been a vehicle for them, particularly just because it was so ensemble. And I do bringing up vehicle on this show again with you guys. But I found myself surprised at just how big a cast this is. At the end, the guys who made it back down to camp and they're exchanging hugs, I was like, have those guys been in this movie this whole time? Like, would I have seen them on the side of the mountain, or did they just show up? They're just guys who show up at the end crying.
Well, that's one of the points that I think is the issue with the film, because as JJ said, in Krakauer's book, it's the hero, the protagonists are those guys that turn around and come back, that decide not to go for the summit because there's just things going on. And I'm like, I haven't seen those guys before. There were several times I'm like, who are those guys? I mean, I knew I hadn't seen them before because I couldn't match them with anything, and it was problematic to me because I didn't know if they were part of another team, because we've already been set up with there's so many teams, and were those Scott's team? I didn't know, and we just didn't get a full sense of who everybody was in terms of their role of were they on Scott's team or Rob's team, and that was a big problem for me, as well as where we were on the mountain at certain points. To know who somebody was and why they were there, I couldn't keep track of where are we, why are you showing us this, who are these people, how are they related to what we just saw in the previous scene.
Right.
So just to keep track of all the people on the mountain, I knew, I think they did a nice job with costuming, so that, okay, I see a guy in yellow and black, okay, that's Doug, okay, now he's walking up the mountain, Rob's in red, and I can track those people, and I could do that. But again, I knew they were distinct individuals, but I couldn't place necessarily who everybody was, what team they were part of, and where they were in the trek up the mountain, which became very problematic.
And see, I think that's interesting because for some reason, I had a pretty easy time figuring out who everybody was and knowing which teams they were on and everything, and where they were on the mountain, but I still didn't fully connect with them.
So there's the one that bothered me the most was there's a scene with a woman and a Sherpa, and she's talking about, no, I'm not going to go back.
That's the MSNBC gal.
Is that who that? Because I thought, I wasn't sure, and then I thought the Sherpa's with her, and then we get to the ropes aren't there. The ropes aren't there. I'm like, is this... okay, now I'm trying to piece together why you edited it together in this order. Are you telling me this person was responsible for doing that, and because he was helping this woman, he couldn't get there to get the ropes? I don't know, because you're not giving me enough information. You're just showing me, here's these two people over here.
Okay. Yeah, the why was totally unclear.
Yeah,
why
totally,
that happened the way it did.
Same thing with the oxygen tanks. It's like, okay, we had a lot of discussions about we need to bring these oxygen tanks, and then it's... No, I don't have any. And I'm like, okay, is that the case? Or is it he's gotten, because of lack of oxygen, he's not able to think clearly and isn't being able to know that those are full or half full, because then later on he goes back and says, oh, Rob, I found some, they're half full.
Krakauer, can we talk? That might be a time to talk about how Krakauer represented that. And I don't know how much you want to go down this way on it, but Krakauer talked about that as it was because he was compromised in his logical thinking, that there were multiple half-filled oxygen tanks up there on the mountain, and that he went and checked them multiple times, but because he was not thinking straight, it was that. And Krakauer didn't point the finger at him. He said, it could have been because of this. Who knows? Krakauer said, we don't know why he wasn't able to make that connection why it was there. It might have been the tense situation. He sort of threw out all the questions that could be possible there. And I think that character is Harold, Andy Harris, right, that was checking them. And he just said, all we know is that there were these half-filled oxygen tanks there, and the chance to have the oxygen was there, but because people weren't thinking straight, in particular Harold, people didn't get oxygen. and there was this perception. So that's the kind of thing where, because there were 2 maybe 7-second vignettes about it, and that particular point, we didn't get anything about that. But Krakauer did a good job of saying, this happened, this is someone who could have affected it, and we don't know why it didn't happen. So that's the kind of stuff I missed in this movie. Just the full perspective and the why.
Yeah, there seemed to be lots of setups of these are things that may become issues, and then when they did, there was the ball was dropped as far as follow-up on any point of view or perspective or position on why that happened, or without even saying it happened because of this, of giving us some context of it could have been this or that, to give us options even. It was just like no one knows, it just so happened to be this way, which again, you're not telling me a story, you're just chronicling events again.
The mountain, I think, ended up looking convincing and beautiful. I mean, knowing that they didn't spend 90 days on the side of Mount Everest to shoot this thing, I ended up feeling like I was in place pretty well. You guys agree? How'd you feel about the look of the film?
I only noticed one shot in the whole film, which is pretty impressive, where they were looking up at the top of Everest, and it looked a little digital. That was like just one shot. The rest of the time, I was convinced they were there. And I know they shot some of it in Nepal, and I believe some of it at one of the base camps, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's my understanding they used some of that footage from the Everest documentary from 90 whatever. They used some of that footage actually in this film. So I don't know if that's just some of your establishing shots or things like that, but I had read somewhere that they had used some of that actual footage of Everest in this film.
The cinematography was done by Salvatore Totino, who has done some other films that I actually quite like. Well, he did the Robert Langdon films, right? He did the Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons. He's definitely a Ron Howard guy. He did Made in America, the documentary, People Like Us, The Dilemma. He did Frost Nixon. I was a big fan of that film. And Cinderella Man. So he's got some big films under his belt. He ended up doing this film. I think generally capturing compelling scenes of largesse, he did a pretty good job with. I felt like I was there, particularly the ice falls. I felt like if there could have been some more visual thrills like that, like that's what I was expecting going into this movie, and I felt like there weren't enough. I wanted more of that sort of exhilaration as long as it was going to be so big. And then we're sitting there in a film that is ostensibly, it's made for IMAX, it's made for the big screen, it's done up in 3D, and I walked out thinking, nah.
And that, I know you wanted more thrilling things, but if they were to make it thrilling, then, we could have seen that maybe the mountain's kind of the bad guy here. So let's, back off. Don't make it too thrilling. No, I'm just kidding. But I thought that a lot of the setup shots were pretty. There were 3 particular shots that I loved, and some of the aerials were great. The aerial that brought us to the bridge when we started early in the film, where we were coming up there, and you saw the 2 bridges, the 2 rope bridges, and they were so small and so far away. And as you got closer, you saw all the climbers coming across the bridge, and then the aerial moved up and over the bridge, and it went all the way vertical and looked down. That was a beautiful shot. And then I talked about the pullback shot that I liked. There were 2 shots of the side of the mountain that I liked. Well, or actually one that I liked and one that I didn't. And it's going to talk a little bit about the emotion. When Jake Gyllenhaal, when Scott Fisher is on the side of the mountain and not dead yet, and they show him full screen left, and you have the full background there, that worked well. Then they did the same shot with Rob Hall when he is pretty much dead, and that's not a statement to me. Unless they're using it as a contrast, and I didn't get that. So I take those 3 shots. They were my 3 favorite shots. Outside of that, it was pretty much missing it. I think you go back to the point that we were talking about with the IMAX before. There's so many, close-ups and extreme close-ups, and it's like, this is not an IMAX movie. I don't think you need to see it in IMAX. There's the thing that I was hoping, like you said, Pete, to go there and see these amazing shots in this beautiful mountain mixed with the drama of the climb, just weren't there, because while there were some great setup shots and there were some of those pretty things, the thrill was gone.
Yeah, I think JJ pretty much hit it on that. I think there was Yeah, I don't know that I think people should see it, if they're interested, go see it in the theater on a large screen. Not maybe necessarily IMAX. I saw it in IMAX 3D. I don't know if you guys had that.
I think we had to. It's exclusive this week.
Was it just okay? So the only option was 3D. Okay,
only
yeah.
option.
I don't know that, and as far as I know, this is one of those. I don't think it was shot in 3D initially. I think they convert it post. But yeah, neither of those things really added a lot to me. I think the shots JJ mentioned, those some of those beauty shots on the bridge and all that, the 3D did add something, or when they're across the ladders, it added a little bit more of that. And those are the only times I actually felt anything. But yeah, there wasn't really. I think in terms of the IMAX effect, I wasn't as wowed as I thought I was going to be.
It didn't once go big. That's the thing that I was so frustrated about. Like, even in the worst IMAX experience, when you actually see the aspect ratio change repeatedly throughout the film, like Dark Knight Rises, and I found myself so frustrated with that film because the IMAX aspect ratio keeps changing compared to when it's done really well, like in Catching Fire, when she goes up the elevator and it enters the arena and it changes to the big format IMAX, and then it rides out the rest of the film in that format. It didn't once actually appear to have been shot in IMAX. It just appeared to be a fairly large movie that went way too enthusiastic on using the big screen for close-ups than using the big screen to really capture the grandiosity of the environment. I just didn't feel it, Andy.
They didn't actually film it in IMAX, though, right?
No, I don't think they did. But that's why I walked out so frustrated, because what am I doing? Like, why are they doing this exclusive IMAX 3D thing when the movie doesn't need it? They didn't aspire to it.
You could get the same effect by sitting about 8 inches away from your TV screen.
I get the same. I could put my iPhone on a little hook over my head like a carrot.
That was really it. It was just everything was just blown up big, and yeah, it just didn't do it. I mean, one other thing that bothered me is we start off on Everest at the beginning of the film, like they're on there, they're going for the summit or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's like 3 months earlier. And so I thought, structurally, I'm like, this is the only way you can get me interested, is to show me these great shots of Everest and the climbers and that nice sort of profile shot of them as the camera sort of pans down the side of the mountain as we see this trail of climbers. I'm like, oh, this is going to be exciting. Oh, cut to now 3 months ago. Now we're going to get all this background and characters, which, again, we have no emotional investment. And then we come back to the same shot again. And I was like,
they repeated the exact same shot.
And there was no emotional resonance for me for that of like, am I seeing this again because I've now going to have a different experience? Like, at first it's like, wow, this is really cool, and then now later on, because we know bad things are going on, that there's some sense of looming doom and tragedy about what we're seeing. No, it was just, let's use the same shot again. And I that really disappointed me, because there was nothing that changed about our perspective on that. But by that point, I had pretty much figured out the film wasn't going to do anything to stir any emotions out of anybody at that point anyway.
I was waiting for them to re-drop the title card. I was like, oh, here's the mountain again. Let's see, what's this movie called?
Don't forget, it's Everest. I'm going to do that on every movie now. Don't forget, you're watching Everest. I think it screwed up the pacing for me, too. Opening on the mountain for no real compelling reason screwed up the pacing for me, because then it took us back to the building, and here we are. We got Krakow. We're at an airport. We're flying around. We're doing training. And I felt like that part ended up being sort of ramrodded down our throats a little bit, and without enough, they did the big setup, like, we're going to train you, but there was no training montage. There was no evidence that anybody was actually training for 40 days. And then they're on the mountain, and I know that it's enormously difficult to compress, 60 days of preparation and experience to actually mount a summit of Mount Everest into 2 hours. I know that's difficult, but it just threw the pacing off, and I think because of that would have been a great opportunity to get to know these characters a little bit, even if we have to eschew some of the camp stuff.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of story, and even Sam Worthington's character Guy and his team that are over on a mountain 5 miles away, because we see Rob talk to them, and we get the little note 5 miles east of or west of Everest. And I thought, who are those guys? Why are they there until he comes back? And I thought, okay, we had never, as I recall, we had never seen him before, to give us context of who they were. And I thought, if you need to pick some things to cut, cut all that stuff at the introducing everybody, because we could have got all that embedded at Camp Better, and going back to JJ's point of that scene with Krakauer asking everybody why they're doing it is a great opportunity to really just flesh out these characters and delve into them. And I would have rather started the film there at base camp to just really get to know everybody and set things up, but instead we felt rushed all the way through to just chronicle events.
And a point to pacing, that once we got into the climax, the climax went on for a good amount of time. Once we started getting into the real dread at the top of the mountain, and then slamming us into the living room in Christchurch, and then slamming us into the dining room in Texas, going from a raging storm on the mountain with a extremely loud music cue to drop us into, hey, we're calling ambassadors. There was definitely a miss there. It was super disjointed in the middle of high drama to get a satellite phone call. And I get that maybe that's the timing of the way things happened, but it's not accurate for an audience member in any regard.
We haven't really talked about the director much, and I really haven't seen much of his films. I know he was kind of a big director in, I believe he's from Iceland, before he kind of started making some U.S. films. But, I mean, Contraband, Two Guns, they're films that strike me as movies that I can take or leave, just kind of mindless action sorts of films. Maybe I'm not being fair to them, but I haven't seen them. That's how they appeared from the trailers. It just strikes me that it may be just a little odd that this is the guy who was helming this project.
If it were the Krakauer project, he would not be the director. That's my guess. I've not seen any of these movies. So.
Even as the Beck project, it still strikes me as a strange choice.
Right. Or even as the first project, right? If this is the first, feature film about this Everest story, you're right.
So I was gonna make a crack about the first time I saw this film when it was called Cliffhanger, and I would love. I sort of wish that we had done a show on Cliffhanger, because I would love to flick chart this next to Cliffhanger. But mostly I went to the IMPA, the movie poster awards gallery, to look at the posters. And what's really funny is that the poster for Everest and the poster for Maze Runner: The Scorch Trials are identical, with the exception of color tone. One is blue, one is red, and I find that telling about this season's releases. Anybody moved by the music?
I don't know. I guess it didn't hit me that much. I love Dario Marianelli. I think he's a fantastic composer. I guess it kind of did its job, but I really wasn't paying that much attention to it. The one thing that I did notice audio-wise is there were times, and I don't know if it was the audio mix, I don't know if it was the amount of wind or effects or music in any particular scene, but there were a good number of scenes where I just could not even figure out what the heck people were saying. And,
oh, yes. Oh.
And I was just like, am I supposed to be hearing what they're saying, or is this kind of just an artistic decision to make it this way? Because for the life of me, I'm just like, I feel like they're saying something important, but I just don't know what it is.
Wow, I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's, how am I supposed to build that emotional connection with people who just constantly have stuff on their faces? Like,
well, it wasn't even
masks,
that.
Talking through oxygen, talking through wind.
There were times where I could see their mouths, and they were actually talking on screen with their face right there in the shot, and there's still just so much noise that I couldn't figure out what the heck they were saying.
To your point about Dario Marianelli, you're absolutely right, and I had forgotten. We just saw the Box Trolls. I loved the soundtrack to the Box Trolls, the score to the Box Trolls. Long Way Down, terrific. Redemption, terrific. Like, he's just got a history of fantastic scores, and I didn't. This is another one I didn't connect with, but I think I was already so disgruntled with the overall experience of the film that I didn't. It just didn't help.
My thing is just the fact that it went from we'll say 700 to 0 much too rapidly for me. There wasn't consistency in it to me, but other than that, I didn't notice the thing. I did have the problems hearing people as well. in terms of the script, but I kind of just attributed that to the environment. Pete, what did you say when you left the theater?
What did I say? I don't
That
remember.
is not an inspiring film.
I remember what I was going to say. I had a whole point. You're right. I did. I walked out. I said, that is not an inspiring film. But then, as we were driving home, we pulled into the house, and I realized who the hero was of the entire film.
Okay.
It was the helicopter pilot, the Nepalese helicopter pilot. That was, I think, maybe the most exhilarating 30-second sequence of the entire film for me when they rescue Beck, and he said... The pilot turns to him and says, I'm just going to lift the tail off the ground, and then we're going to fall for a while. Are you okay with that?
I'm good.
I was in stitches. But the best part of it was I'm sitting next to it. This is the first time we've been able to do this. I'm sitting next to JJ in the theater as we're watching this. Now, JJ, for those who don't know, has spent an inordinate number of hours in a helicopter. Oh, yeah. And I don't know what he was thinking during this time. We didn't talk about it. But watching him watch this helicopter in action at 20 some odd thousand feet made that experience so much better.
I was shaking my head constantly and saying, "No way, do not." And I honestly don't remember from the Krakauer book whether they did or not. I wouldn't have believed it. It must be true if it's in this movie. But wow, the whole "let's fall off the mountain and see what happens" idea. Never would I ever do any of this stuff that anyone in this movie was doing, but not in a helicopter. No way, no how.
It wasn't until we see what happens. He said, I'm going to drop until the blades catch the wind or something like that, because catch the air.
That's all he could do.
It's too, exactly. But yeah, as soon as they started going up there, I was thinking the exact same thing. I'm like, I know they can't get helicopters up that high. The air's too thin. There's no lift. They're not going to be able to do this, because I don't remember if they were able to airlift him. So yes, it was Pete. It is probably like, if you're going to watch this movie, watch the opening title sequence and then just skip to this part, because it's exhilarating
so awesome.
to see. Are they going to go? They make one pass at it. No, we got to pull some weight off of it, and then going to try it again. Yeah.
That was totally my thought too. When they go up there and he's like, "Oh, we can't make it," and so then they leave, and I thought, well, that's pretty much the tale of this movie. Like, we're gonna try stuff and it's not gonna work, so we're not gonna do it again. But when they went back after throwing seats out and stuff, I thought, okay, this is it. The whole movie's gonna pay off right here at about an hour and a half, and it sure did. When it was like a pod race. It was the end. He's like going down through the ice falls. That was great. It was great. All right. The movie is, so as we may have mentioned, we saw this movie, all of us saw this in IMAX 3D because it is exclusive for the first week in IMAX 3D. They're doing a partnership. And so I think, and I don't mean to speak for you all, but I think the general recommendation is, you know what, hold off this week. Wait until it opens nationwide and skip the IMAX 3D. You don't need it. Am I right?
A firm.
That's correct.
I don't know. I still enjoyed the scope of Everest on the big screen. So I don't know if I would say skip the IMAX. I still enjoyed just the largesse of looking at that mountain on the screen.
All right, there you have it.
So I'm in the sure, why not camp.
3 out of 4 dentists agree. All right, so let's go around the table. Last words, everybody. Andy, why don't you start?
I think I enjoyed it slightly more than you guys did, and maybe it's just because of my daughter and her experience of watching the film. I didn't love the film. I found it very interesting to watch. I enjoyed learning about kind of this situation and the horrors of it, and getting a sense of what this world of hiking Everest has become as it's gone so commercial. I really enjoyed all of that aspect of it. But I just didn't fall in love with the film. I didn't get really emotionally invested in the film. I thought it was pretty to look at. I really enjoy the spectacle of it. But yeah, I wanted to walk out of it feeling just completely heartbroken by the lives lost and thrilled by the people who made it off. And I just didn't walk out feeling anything.
Let's see, my notes that I had written beforehand, I wanted my closing thoughts were that it was a competent film that reenacts the events of the spring of 1996, and now I guess competent in the sense that yes, the film has a beginning and an end, and there's scenes that are make a cohesive narrative that basically sequenced events that happen. But I don't. As we've discussed this more, I think there's just so many issues with this that, to me, it's a great intro for somebody that, I hope will then go pick up Krakauer's book after this, and I hope it leads people to learn more about this, maybe as a launching point. And that's the best thing that this film can do, is people walk in thinking they're going to get a spectacle and are disappointed and want to learn more about what happened, and we'll look at the other sources that I think are going to give them a lot more exhilarating adventure just through reading Krakauer's book Into Thin Air. But yeah, I was really disappointed in this. It has some beauty shots, but other than that, there wasn't a lot that I took away from it.
Both Andy and Steve have said really good things, and I would echo it. I want to go back to the first thing I said. Everything I've said over the course of this hour has really sounded negative, but it is. I did like the movie. It is something to see. I think you should see it on a big screen or a really nice screen. I don't think it belongs on IMAX. I can't stand 3D. It's good to see that, but I think what the point that Steve's making is the thing that I think is most important. It's an important time, of an important story that happened. I loved the Krakauer book, and if nothing else, especially for people like you, Pete and Andy, who haven't experienced the Krakauer book, it's great to know that this happened and to get some of the beginning, and maybe it'll lead people to read the captivating story that's out there.
I think it's funny that we, now that we know where the movie actually came from, that we keep coming back to Krakauer, when in fact the book was based on Left 4 Dead: My Journey Home from Everest, by Beck Weathers. And so I'm actually curious about that one too. That makes me, and I'm with you guys, both of you. The Krakauer book is one that's now, high on my list, but I'm really curious about the perspective that comes from, Josh Brolin's alter ego. And in fact, here it is. He was subject to one of the highest altitude medical evacuations ever performed by helicopter. It is plumb documented. Crazy.
Wow.
Anyhow, last words on the film for me. This is one that I'm glad I saw. I'm glad I experienced it. The best thing about it for me was learning about what is going on in Everest, the economy that has built up around Everest, and that's fascinating. Just fascinating to me. The helicopter falling down the side of the mountain, and if you can see it in a theater where you are also sitting next to Justin Jaeger, you should definitely take that opportunity, because those are the best 3 parts of the film. So,
one thing I forgot to mention that I was really bummed about, because they have the little bits of text at the end and the pictures of everybody whose lives were lost, etc. I really wish that they had a text screen up just saying what has happened to the industry here. Did this event cause a change in the industry, in the mountain expedition industry of people going up Everest? Has it improved, or is this still how it is? I was really wanted to know.
Well, Andy, come on, that film would have to take a stand on something and say it was a good thing or a bad thing, and it just is not willing to do that.
I don't think it does have the stuff at the beginning when he's talking to all the people. I feel like that scene is presented. I feel like it raised the question in my head, and I feel like they very easily could have said something there, and I would have been happy to learn it.
It's and I can just in my rat hole, it looks like it has gotten much worse. The number of people trying to simultaneously kind of climb this thing. There were 600 and almost 700 people who tried to do it last year. 250 people have died. Most of them are still up there along this narrow path as you summit. So it sounds like a really horrifying experience. I just can't imagine wanting to do that. Head over to flickchart.com/TNR Filmboard, and you can see all the movies that we have ranked as Gangs of Thugs. And you can sign up for an account. You can see if your list of our movies match our list of our movies in terms of your favorites. We would love to see them. Now let's see how high Everest climbs. Is that a thing? Can the mountain actually climb?
All right, Everest or the Bourne Legacy?
Bourne Legacy.
Bourne Legacy.
Yeah, Bourne Legacy. Everest or Child 44? I will definitely say Everest here.
Yeah, I'll do Everest.
Everest.
And we need Tommy to do his train line here. Everest or Thor: The Dark World? Thor for me.
Yeah. Thor.
Yes.
Thor.
Everest or The Equalizer? I will do Everest.
I'm interested in Steve's perspective on this one.
You know I'm going to pick The Equalizer. And I believe JJ may back me up on that one.
I think he may.
Yes, I will. Equalizer.
Yes.
I can't remember how I feel about the Equalizer.
It's time for my blog post.
Hold
It's
on, I
time
gotta
for my
go
blog
listen
post.
to that episode again. I think I'm going to
favorite.
say the Equalizer.
All right. Everest or Jack Ryan: Shadow Recruit? I will say Everest here.
Everest.
None of us really liked Jack Ryan.
I know. I still think that's a movie I may put on first.
Yeah, because it does have, like, you actually, like, there's some suspense and there's action and there are ridiculous things and
Yeah.
light bulbs in the mouth and Kenneth Branagh is I am Russian, but
I'm gonna say
you
it.
can have fun with that though.
Yeah.
There's no
I couldn't have any fun with that
emotion to
movie.
this. I will enjoy even hating Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit because it's at least something going on that makes me feel something.
So is that what you're picking too?
Yeah.
Are we split?
Yeah, we're split.
All right. I think it needs to be JJ and Steve.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want me to count?
Yes,
are you
please.
waiting for a count in?
I thought Andy was the official counter person.
I think
am
you
I?
should.
Sorry.
I
Okay.
think we
Okay.
sort of
Ready?
count at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Ready? And 1, 2, 3.
Paper.
Okay.
All right, that was JJ.
Yeah.
Everest.
All right.
All right. Everest takes that one. And now we're down to, it looks like Everest and... Is it going to give me the Wolverine? Nope. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, yeah, it's because it beat Jack Ryan. So there it is. It's number 27 out of 38.
All right.
Sure.
Okay, that's
That's definitely in the right half.
I think, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
We need the star ratings for everybody for
That's right.
Letterboxd.
That's right. I think I'll be.
They'd head over to letterboxd.com/thenextreel. For that,
Andy,
Pete.
I don't know these things. That's not one I hang out at. Letterboxd.com/thenextreel, and there's a list, right? There's a list, the film board list. You have a list.
They can check our diary and they can look at all the films, or they can look at the lists and they can see everything that the film board has ranked. Yeah,
I just like that we have a diary.
That's
I didn't know that it was called a diary, but now I feel better.
shouldn't it be a journal instead of a diary?
That's too hipster.
Oh, okay.
I'm 2 stars.
all right, Steve.
Yeah, I was thinking 2.5 out of 5, right?
Yeah, out of 5,
Yeah,
I'm on
2.5.
2.5 as well.
and I'm 3.5. So
Wow.
there you go.
So what are you doing that math quick?
Yeah,
Oh, it's pretty much 2.5, isn't it? No, 2 3/4.
Divided
2
by
6/8.
4 equals 2.625. Yes.
Oh.
So we'll call that a 2.5.
All right. I certainly feel good about that. What do we? I'm actually really excited we got this one out of the way, because where do we go next month?
Another disaster film?
Kinda.
Hopefully it won't be a disaster. We're going to be jumping into the James Bond franchise. No, wait.
No.
Way
No,
off
we're
by a month.
not, sir.
No, we're not.
I'm a whole month ahead
How
of myself.
dare you, sir?
We're going to Mars. We're going to Mars.
Yes, we are doing The Martian, and that's just in a couple of weeks. So we will be back. Gang of Thugs will be back for The Martian, and that one, I will say, was shot in real 3D. It is so, if you're going to see it in 3D, this would be the movie to see in 3D. I'll probably see it in 3D.
Yep.
I don't know if it's IMAX, but I'm really looking
Everything
forward to it.
is,
and I'll tell you,
everything's being released in IMAX, including Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit.
I will say I read an early review out of the Toronto Film Festival where The Martian played last week, and they said that the film is just transformative. It's going to take the world by storm. It's fantastic. So, very much looking forward to this. It's got some big, giant Martian shoes to fill.
Excellent.
I think that's it. This was a good conversation about a mediocre movie, but as always, it is great to gather with you, gentlemen. JJ, thank you very much.
So good to be back. Thanks, guys.
And Steve Sarmento.
Everest, there have people that have frozen. They will forever rest on Everest.
You did it.
Awesome.
The Everest joke. That's great. I'm going to have you sing my mattress commercials. Andy Nelson.
We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks, everybody.